The date is the 30th of December, 1973. I am located at the residence of my father, Anderson H. Brown, at 505 Egan Street in Charleston, West Virginia. This tape is the beginning of a series of tapes that will be made with my father, or really by my father, for the express purpose of compiling a history of his life. And it will include not only a history of his life, but also pertinent facts concerning many of the other black families in the Kanawha Valley at the time when he was growing up as a young man in Charleston. Dad, this year marks the end of your 93rd birthday. You were born on April 23rd, 1880. That's a milestone for which all of us congratulate you. Tell us, if you will, a little bit about your mother and father. They were both slaves, weren't they?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Who owned your father? Do you remember the name of the family?
My father was owned by a family by the name of Arnold.
Does he have any relatives here in Charleston now?
I think so.
Do you remember his first name?
His first name was Enos Arnold.
Mm-hmm.
And he was one time in the wholesale dry business.
Dry goods business.
Dry goods business here in Charleston.
What was the name of that store? Do you remember?
The name of the store was
Arnold Avenue.
Arnold and Abney.
Mm-hmm. Did the Arnolds?
Wholesale dry goods.
Uh-huh. Did the Arnolds have any children? Do you remember the names of their children?
I remember the name of one son that my father helped to raise. And his name was Enos Arnold, I think, was his name.
Mm-hmm. Now, what was your father's name, Dad?
My father's name was Henry.
And
Henry Arnold Brown.
mm-hmm. Henry Arnold Brown.
Yeah, his middle name was Arnold.
Uh-huh. Now, once in your conversation, you mentioned someone by the name of Enos Arnold, and then someone else by the name of Ike Arnold. Now, who was who? Do you remember?
Well, I'm not sure, but I think the son's name was I think his son's name was Ike
Uh-huh.
Arnold.
Mm-hmm. Now, your father's name was Henry Arnold Brown, and you say he and your mother, whom we'll talk about a little bit later, were both slaves. Do you know where Henry Brown was born, my grandfather?
No, I do not.
Mm-hmm. Now, your mother's name was what? What was her name?
Margaret Stewart, I think it was her
Margaret Stewart.
maiden name.
And she married Henry Brown. Do you remember how many children there were born? I think Andella left records that will give the name of all the children, the nieces and the nephews, and when they were born. And I'll check those records, which I have in a file.
Yes, I don't remember the name.
Now, you mentioned that your father Henry helped practically raise Ike Arnold, the son of Enos Arnold, who owned both you and your mother, your father and your mother.
Yeah.
They lived in slave quarters on the Arnold Place, is that right?
Yes.
Where was that, where was the Arnold Place located and now? How would you describe it?
You mean his business?
Well, where he lived.
Well, I'm not sure where they lived,
Mm-hmm.
but the business place was on Virginia Street, and the name of the business was Arnold and Abner. I think that was the name of the business firm.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, you mentioned that you mentioned Abraham Lincoln and the Declaration of Independence. I don't mean the Emancipation Proclamation. I didn't mean to say the Declaration of Independence.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned that after your father was freed, when Lincoln declared the slaves freed after the Civil War, he moved to Dutch Hollow. Can you remember a little bit about Dutch Hollow?
No, I don't know much about my older brother, and told me that that's where I was born in Dutch Hollow, which is now a part of Dunbar,
Mm-hmm.
West Virginia.
I think I've been out to Dutch Hollow because that's where we used to take my art classes out to the wine cellars up
Yes,
there. It's on a
yes,
road just
yes,
to the right of the road going to Dunbar.
Yes, there were
Toward
wine
Institute.
cellars up there, and
Oh.
yes, some of those cellars I think are still
Yes, because we used to
there.
go draw them. Uh-huh. We used to. They made an interesting study for outdoor sketching with our students. It's too bad that they won't make that into some kind of recreational area now, since there is so much history surrounding them. Do you remember how old you were when you lived in that? You say you were born there.
Yes.
How long did you live there? Do you have any idea?
Not very long, because perhaps a year or two
Mm-hmm.
before we moved to Charleston.
I see. Uh-huh. Now, when you moved to Charleston, where did you, well, we'll talk about that a little bit later. Yes, when you moved to Charleston, where did you move to?
We moved to a place, it's called Swan's Hill. This land was owned by a man by the name of Swan, and he had laid it off into lots, portion of it. And my father purchased one of the lots and built a 3-room, what they call a Jenny Lynn house on this lot.
What is a Jenny Lynn house? I've heard
Just
reference to
it's
that.
just a plain house, board house, plain board.
Did it have a porch?
No, I don't think we had, just had 3 rooms.
rooms.
No porch.
Uh-huh. Do you have any conveniences at that time? Let me see now. Last night you said you might have been about 8 or 9 when your father moved to Swan's Hill, when you were talking about this.
Mhm.
So that would make it about
No,
1890.
I wasn't that old when we moved to Swan's Hill.
Mm-hmm. Well, so anyhow, we're talking about somewhere around the middle of the 1880s then.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Now, where did your father work when he lived up there?
My father was a janitor at a saloon on Canora Street, which was owned by people with the name of Keefers.
Mm-hmm. Wonder if they're related to the Keefers here now.
Yes, I think some of them.
Mm-hmm.
And
Now you mentioned also he worked on Smith's farm, which is also now Dunbar.
yes,
Now, was that before or after you worked at the saloon? Do you remember?
No, that was
Before?
before, I think, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
You told me that Smith's farm was owned by Mr. Smith. It's in the land that's now located in Dunbar. Tell me about a man by the name of Phil Robinson in relationship to the Smith farm.
Phil Robinson was the caretaker of this farm.
Was he black or white?
He was a colored man, and he had charted us all this acreage there, from which is now the city of Dunbar, and was that time owned by Smiths, who they lived here in Charleston. But Phil Robinson was the overseer or the caretaker of that farm.
Mm-hmm. You had an interesting experience with Phil when you were a little fella. You remember that?
Yes. My father worked there part-times on the farm, mostly hoeing corn, planting and hoeing corn, which ran all the way from the back road there in which is now, I don't know the name of that road, but all the way out to the river, which is possibly a mile or more. That was all planted in corn. And my father worked there under Phil Robinson, and the pay was 50 cents a day. Well, I was perhaps 8 or 9 years of age, and I persuaded my father to take me down there with him, and so I could help to hold the corn. Well, my father spoke to Mr. Robinson about me wanting too low, and he told my father that I was too small. But he said, well, you keep worrying me about wanting to come down, so let him come down and get a taste of it. So my father took me down there with him one morning and introduced me to Mr. Robinson and told him that I wanted to hold corn with him. So Robinson said, well, all right. He gave me a hole and took me down and showed me how to start working around the corn. Now, this Robinson lived back way up out. This is the start of the old county road going, which led down to West Virginia State College. Of course, it wasn't there at that time, but the county road. He had a little house right up on the side of the county road, and he got me a hole. Mr. Robertson did, and took me down there. I said, now, Anderson, so you start right here. You showed me how to work around the corn, and you go on out to the river. This road here will lead you out to the river bank. Then when you get out there, you just turn over and come on back where you started from. All right, Uncle Phil. We call him Uncle Phil. So, well, I worked from probably about 9 o'clock maybe to 10, and the sun began to beam down on me. And of course, Uncle Phil knew I wasn't going to be able to stand that heat and to do the work. But my father wanted to cure me because he was worrying him about taking me down to the farm. So the sun began to beam down about 10 o'clock. It was hot. I was pretty well worn. I hadn't hoed over 2 or 3 hills according to time. So finally I took the hoe and went on back up to the house. Said, Phil, I can't work on the sun is too hot. So they had a good laugh with me about that. That's all I do. I want you to get your fill of it. So I knew you couldn't do that. I told you you couldn't. So that ended at the end of me and the farm business as far as hoeing corn was concerned.
Did you ever do much or any farming after that, Dad?
No, it killed me a farmer.
Mm-hmm. But you later on you were to own quite a bit of farm acreage though, weren't you?
Oh yeah.
Wish I had some of it now with all these people going to the farms. Well, tell me a little bit about your mother. Margaret Stewart Brown is her name. You mentioned last night that she always said she wanted her children to have an education. She wanted them to learn to read and to write. And for that reason, she wouldn't let your father, Henry, move to a farm out in the country where he had a chance to take over a job because there was no school out there.
Yes. I don't know the man's name, but anyhow, he wanted. My brothers were all older than I. This man knew that if he got my father out there with all those children, they could do lots of farming. But my mother absolutely refused. There wasn't any schools there.
You remember where that was that they wanted you to go? Wanted him to go?
I don't know very well. But my father said, no, I'm not going to let you take those children out there. There isn't any school there. And I'm not going to let you take them. I'm not going out there with you.
And that's your mother telling your father that.
Yes, my mother told my father that. So that settled that part of it.
So then what did you do? What did she do? Or what did the family do at that time?
Well, I don't know whether we were there at Dutch Holler or not then. But I think we was. I think he was there working on Smith's farm.
So then you moved into town.
Yeah.
And then
after my father, he scuffed around and bought this lot up there. I think it paid about something like $50 or $100 for it. And he had a friend by the name of, I don't know his first name, his name was Allen. He was kind of a local carpenter. And he helped my father to build this 3-room house.
Now, you mentioned that when you moved to town, your mother took in laundry. Do you remember the names of some of the people that she worked for?
Well, I think there were people who lived on Kenora Street, those wealthy people way up in the 12 or 1400 block of Kenora. I think one name was Smith.
What about the Danas?
Well, I don't think she was Dana. I think the name was Smith. But she used to do laundry. My brother and I would have to come over sometime and get that laundry in great big old laundry baskets and pick it up to my mother, and she would do that, wash those clothes and iron them. I think she got something like $1.50 for a basket, a big basket. And my brother was very handy at building wagons and things like that. We used to put them on his wagon.
Which brother was that?
Enos. Mm-hmm. He made wagons out of the iron wheelbar wheels.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned that after you moved off of the hill, no, you mentioned that your mother did laundry for the Smiths and some other wealthy people up in that area. That would be that section on Kanawha Street, or Kanawha Boulevard as it's known now, between Brook Street and Morris Street, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Now, after you left Swans Hill, which is now Watts Hill, and incidentally, that's where your parents are buried, isn't it? We go up there every
Yes.
Memorial Day to decorate the grave.
Hickenbottom Cemetery.
Hickenbottom Cemetery on Swans Hill. How do you get up there? I remember how to drive, but if I were to describe it to somebody, I'd have a hard time telling them.
It is now, you would now take Watts Street, which leads up to the Watts property on Watts Hill, and Swan Hill is off of the road that leads off of what is now Watts Street. To the left, you go up to the Hickenbottom Cemetery, and all that straight up the hill where we live. See, and the Watts Road leads off to the right, and that street now is named Watts Street.
Now that's from where we are here on Egan Street. That's across Elk River, and then you go as though you were going to Edgewood, but not up that far. And Watts Street sort of circles the hill there, sort of borders the hill.
Across the bridge, which is now the Washington Street. At that time, we called it Cinder Road. There wasn't any paving at the time, but they used to haul cinders during the summer and put cinders on it so to make it partially passable during bad weather.
I see.
So it was called, which is now called
Washington Street.
Washington Street. It was Cinder Road at that time.
All right. So then you left the hill. Why did you leave Watts Hill? Oh, before we go to that though, who's buried up in that cemetery, Dad?
Well, practically all of my father bought those lots when one of my oldest sister died.
What was her name?
Her name was Mary. Mary, she married a man by the name of Nicholas. And they lived up at Hinton. He worked on the railroad for Nicholas did. And they had one child, a daughter, name was Nana. And I think my sister Mary was one of the first one of our families was buried out there in this Hickenbottom burial ground. And my father's buried there, my mother, my grandmother, my aunt, and a number of my relatives are buried out there.
Now, what arrangement do you have with the city for that? I notice every time we go up, it's always cleared off, and there's a house right there practically adjoining that.
Yeah, well, the city...
Mrs. Lepore, the nurse lived up there in that house.
Yeah, the city, they take care of it now. We used to take care of it ourselves. Every Decoration Day, before Decoration Day, we'd go up there and clean off our lots, but now the city takes care of it, keeps it cleared.
So you don't have to do anything but just go up and decorate it.
That's all.
All right, now you left Watts Hill or Swans Hill, your parents did, and from there, where did they move and why? Why did they leave the hill?
Well, I think my mother wanted to get over town so she could more work, closer to the work, so and my father, of course, he was kind of anxious to move to, because he had to walk all the way from the Kiefer Saloon, where he was a porter, a janitor, up on the hill every day. So I don't know just how they located this house, but anyhow, at any rate, they found this little 3 or 4 room house on Court Street, just across the railroad. There were three or four of those houses was built there. A man by the name of Conwell. He built those houses, rented them to colored people.
How much rent did you pay?
$5 a month was the rent.
Do you remember any of the other people who lived in those houses?
Yes, Taylors.
Agnes?
The Taylor's families, but they had 3 or 4 children.
Agnes, Sarah,
Agnes, Sarah, Percy,
Bessie.
Bessie, yes, the Taylors. And the Birds lived in one of them. And I forget the name of the family that lived in the other 2 now. I just can't remember the name. But there were 3 or 4 of those little old houses there. And Conwell, he lived in a big house just on the opposite side of the railroad. But he owned all that property in there.
Was Anderson's the name of the other family?
No, I don't think so.
Uh-huh. All right. Now that was across the track on Court Street.
Yeah.
It's over there where they have a whole lot of warehouses and so forth now. Mm-hmm. Now, you remember how old you were at about that time?
Hmm?
You remember how old you were at that time?
Well, I must have been, when we moved off the hill, I must have been about 7 or 8.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 7 or 8 years old when we moved over there.
All right. Now, you mentioned your brothers. Tell me the names of some of the other members of your family. Your mother was Margaret Stewart Brown. Your father was Henry Brown. Now, you mentioned your oldest sister, Mary. Who were some of the other sisters? Do you remember?
Well, I had 1 or 2 sisters. One of my sisters died after we moved over on well, she didn't die on Court Street. She died there on Dryden Street. Her name was Maggie, I think was her name. She was, I don't think Maggie was old. She was more than probably 6 or 7 years of age at the time.
Now, but going back to the house on the hill, you mentioned that John was anxious to get your father to deed that property on the hill to him. It seems that he had bought the adjoining lot and wanted to build a larger house on it.
Yeah.
So your father deeded it to your brother John, but John didn't keep the payments up in spite of the fact that he was a good butcher. He let it go.
He was making good money at that time. But he failed to build a house, his house, or a larger house on it, and my father owed some $100 or $2 on the place, and John was supposed to pay off the mortgage on my place and build a large house there. But he failed. He didn't do it. The place was foreclosed.
All right. Now, so you've mentioned your sister Mary and your sister Maggie, who was a little girl when she died.
Yeah.
Now name some other sisters. There was Mariah.
I can't think of those others.
And the one who lived in Ruth, Mariah and Ruth, and then of course Aunt Della.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what about the brothers? You had a brother
Well,
named John. Tell me about John. You say he was a butcher, and at that time he was making about $10 or $12 a week.
Yeah, he was making good money at that time, but those other boys, they didn't stay at home. We couldn't depend on them. They didn't stay at home regular, you know. They'd come in sometimes, but John finally got married. He married, and of course he came up there. He lost the property over on the hill, and I don't know just how. Just how he just didn't keep up his payments as the company, the building loan foreclosed on him.
All right, now you've mentioned a brother Fred.
Yeah, Fred. Yeah, Fred.
Where'd he work?
He worked for Donnelly's trucking company. They used to have drays, you know, to haul. Everything was hauled. They didn't have automobiles in those days. They had mule teams with Fred, and Donnelly had a feed store. Fred worked for Donnelly for quite a while, and finally he quit Donnelly's and went to work for people who had opened a 10-cent store opposite the arcade on Virginia Street, and Fred they decided to move out in Idaho, Boise City, Idaho, and they took Fred and another fellow that was working there, named Gus Turner, and a woman that was working with him, name of what's that name there? I think her name was Hackley, Mary Hackley, I think was her name. Anyway, they took all those three colored people to Boise City, Idaho with them. Well, Fred didn't like Boise City very well, so he left and went to Denver, and he got a job working for the governor, man. I don't know whether he was governor when Fred first worked for him. Anyway, he was a governor of Denver by the name of Gunter, J.C. Gunter. He was a lawyer and governor of Colorado, and Fred worked for him for a number of years. but Fred never helped my mother any. Never sent her any money. Sometimes we wouldn't hear from him for years. And finally, he died, sick and died out there in Denver. And he never sent my mother a nickel all the while he was out there, working out there. When he died, I had probably taken over my mother and my sister and myself at that time.
Do you remember what year that was, Dad, that he died?
He died in 1918, I think it was.
You remember where he was buried?
Buried in Denver. After he died, some of his friends out there, they notified me. But about every 2 or 3 years he would write, something. And anyhow, they had my address, and they notified me that Fred had passed away. And I said, well, that time I was up and scuffling. I had a little meat market on Court Street at the time. So I told the undertaker to give him a decent burial and let me know what the cost was, and I would send him a check for it. So in the meantime, they had, I don't think he wasn't working for the governor then, but
Keep on talking. Keep on talking there. Okay. No, go ahead, Dan. Keep on talking. Wait a minute, let's see. I had to answer the telephone. That was Terry. So anyhow, he buried him, but didn't he have some land? Didn't the governor or someone leave him some land in Colorado?
No, the governor didn't leave. I hadn't got to that part of it.
Oh, I see. No, I was telling you to keep on talking.
After he had passed, and the governor, some of his friends wrote me in of his death, so I said, well, let me know, I'll give him a decent burial, and let me know the cost, and I'll send you money for it. So, anyhow, they got him ready for burial. In the meantime, the governor was in Florida on vacation. So, they wrote me, and the governor, when he found they notified him, of course Fred had been there with him, had even had his picture there in his living room, holding one of his horses. And they were very, so the governor then, when he heard that Fred had passed, and he notified his law office to see that he had a decent burial, and send him the bill. So that should relieve me of having to pay the burial. And I had a nice letter from the governor and the governor's wife, and I had several letters from. Then the governor finally told me that he had filed a claim about 6 months before he died on some grazing land, but he hadn't got title to it. And so the governor told me just what I'd have to do in order to get title to it. So I said, well, so he helped me. He picked up the papers and everything, and I had to get my brothers and sisters who were here to sign their interest to me, see. And then I finally had to put a little 3-room shack on it, according to government regulations, see. So the governor, he looked after that for me. And I had to go out there then in order to get the title to it. And I had to go to the federal land office in Trinidad, Colorado, to sign up for papers and everything. And the governor gave me all the instructions what I'd have to do, and he put a little old 3-room shack on the place. It's 280 acres of grazing land, But I found out later on, the reason why the government was so interested, the government owned the joint, and he'd gobble up all he'd get himself, you know. And he figured if he'd get this Fred to take this other land, well, he could use that too, see. So, so after he got that little shack built on it, then I had to go out there then and finish up clean up the title, and he told me how to get there, and he had his ranch foreman to meet me at the station when I got out there. We got off a little town called Model, Colorado. Then I had to go 10 miles out in the country out to this where this farm, this acreage was, grazing land. So his ranch foreman met me at the station, and when I got off the train that morning, and took me out there and showed me the little shack that the government had built, and drove me over part of that grazing land and everything. And they must have been about 50 or more Mexicans there. I was frightened. I was certainly frightened when I saw all those Mexicans.
Why were you frightened of Mexicans?
Huh?
Why were you frightened?
Well, I was on Lone Negro out there with one of all those Mexicans on that ranch, see, and they were eating dinner when I got out there. They had a red table longer from here across the street, and they wanted me to have something to eat. I said, no, I said I couldn't. I was frightened. I wanted to get away from it as soon as possible. So I had inquired at the station, and they told me there wouldn't be another train through there until the next morning, see, passenger train. So I said, well, I went to the station, and that's what the station, they'd already told me that there wouldn't be another passenger train through until next morning. But I said, well, I'll go back. They wanted to stay out there at the ranch. I said, no, I'll just stay out there with all those Mexicans. So I had him take me back in town, into a little town named Model, Colorado. He took me back to Model, and I went to the station, and I wanted to check to see if there's any way I could get up to Trinidad. That's about 17 miles. It's a pretty good sized town. So the station agent told me, and I said, well, now, I said, there'll be a local freight through here pretty soon, and you might make a deal with the conductor on that train to take you to Model. I said, all right. So the train pulled in, and I saw one of the brakesmen, asked him, told him I wanted to get to Model, and the agent told me he might arrange for me to go over on this train. Well, how much money have you got? I said, I haven't got very much money. I just got a little change. I had money, but I had it stashed away. So I pulled out, and I had something like $1, nearly a couple of dollars in. I said, that's all I have. I said, I can get some money when I get to Model. So he said, well, so get in one of those cars right there. So I got in the car. I gave him what change I had. And when I got to Model, I got off then. Got off and went up to a hotel there and got a room. Went to a picture show got a room, went to a picture show. I couldn't get another train out of model for Denver until the next morning. So I went to the picture show, and that next morning I got a train for Denver. And I was all right if I got in Denver.
You remember, was the picture show Jim Crow, as they called it? Was it Jim Crow picture show? Did you have to sit upstairs or in the balcony or something, or do you remember?
No, I don't remember. I think I just got a ticket for the balcony anyway. But I don't.
Well, you mentioned being afraid of the Mexicans. Did the Mexicans have a reputation for being not so friendly toward Negroes at that time?
Well, yeah, that was.
Oh, you just didn't know them at all.
No, I wasn't taking a chance. Mexican, I wasn't. So they thought you had any money, you know, especially when there's so many of them. See?
Yeah, nothing.
These ranch folks, so I knew I wasn't going to stay out there with them.
How soon after your brother died, Dad, did all this action take place?
Oh, probably a year or so. Took quite a time to get the title, because he had filed a claim for it, see, but he hadn't got title to the land. See.
So whatever finally happened to the land?
I finally sold it.
You sold to the governor?
Sold to the governor. The governor, he had hogged up all he could get himself, you know. See? So he figured if he filed this claim in Fred's name, but he could still. Fred would be there with him, and he would still get it.
I see.
It was crazy. He had probably a couple of thousand sheep on the place there. It's called grazing land.
So you were a cattle rancher for a while then, in all of your experiences. It'd been interesting if you'd held on to that land. Do you remember how far Model and Trinidad, Colorado were from Denver? You know, my first visit to Denver was this past summer when I went to visit Faith.
Oh.
We went up to Aspen.
Kind of a hard place to get to. You had to. I went out. Let's see what's.
Colorado Springs.
Oh no, it's not in that direction. I'm trying to think what railroad went to.
Santa Fe?
Yeah, Santa Fe went to Model. In order to get to Denver, I had to go. I went up to Trinidad. See. Then I got a train out of Trinidad for Denver.
I see. Well, I'm going to look for it.
Santa Fe is a through line, goes right on to the west.
California. The Atchison, Topeka, and the Santa Fe.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to let you rest, catch your breath, get a drink of water, and then I'll sort of rehash what we've talked about.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned you had started talking about your brothers, and you got a very accurate account of your brother Fred, who left as a young man and went westward, and he was to have an interesting experience with Governor Gunther in Colorado, and he
first left Charleston. He went to Idaho.
Went to Boise
City,
Idaho.
Well, he left Boise City and went to Boise City to Denver. And that's where he died, in Denver.
Now, I'm gonna let you get your breath for a minute, and then I'm gonna ask you a little bit more about your brother Charlie, and a little bit more about your brother Enos. Now, you mentioned that your other brothers. Well, you mentioned that your brother Charlie, was a clothing store worker. He worked around some of the clothing stores here in town, and that your brother Enos was a fine mechanic.
Yeah,
and he could do all kinds of things.
Blacksmith.
Blacksmith and mechanic. And then you mentioned that only you and your brother Enos stayed at home. The others were in and out, and then your house really wasn't large enough to accommodate all of them.
No.
And you mentioned how you used to have to carry the water from the spring to your house. You used to have big 2-gallon water buckets. They were cedar buckets.
Mm-hmm.
And that they were stored in a special place in the kitchen. And they were expected to be kept full with that spring water at all time. And the first thing your father wanted to know when he came into that house was, did you boys bring the water in tonight?
Yeah.
And first thing he looked for when he came in was that water.
Well, we forgot to bring it in. We was going around playing and walking around, didn't think, but I know we had to go out to spring that night, and because our father didn't get home around maybe 7 or 8 o'clock, you know. And it's just about dark, but Enos and I had to go and get that water.
Mm-hmm. Now, tell me a little bit more about your brother. Well, before you do that, once when you were talking, you mentioned that while you were living on Court Street, the coal trains used to come up there every evening, somewhere there between Capitol Street and Bullitt Street. The coal trains parked out there on the track.
Yeah.
And the Taylor family that you mentioned earlier, the Andersons, and the Birds used to climb up on that
on a coal train.
Coal train.
Stole coal off. Just throw it off on the side of the track, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the train, sometimes they'd have to stop. They only get orders, you know. They wouldn't be there for very long, maybe sometimes a couple of hours. But we used to throw that coal off, and then after the train, well, we wouldn't wait for it to pull out, but we'd get it, take it and put it in our coal bin on a little coal house on the back of the lot. See, where they kept coal. That's where we got a lot of our coal right off the cars.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, let's stop for a minute, see what we've got. All right, now you can begin telling us a little bit more about your brother Enos. You mentioned that he was blacksmith, and you said he was a good mechanic. That's Arthur and Mabel and Arthur and Mabel's father.
Now, don't record this here. I'm getting my thoughts together, see. Mm-hmm. But I put him in business, see. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I bought a blacksmith outfit for him, see. And he used to sharpen. I can start now anytime you want.
Okay, go ahead. I'll hold it. I just want to get it closer to you. Go ahead.
You asked me about my brother Enos. He was a natural-born mechanic. He could make most anything out of wood and iron. And he could sharpen tools. He could sharpen a pocket knife, put an edge on it so you could really shave with it.
Really?
And he, after I was able to do some things for myself, I finally bought a blacksmith outfit for him. He learned to make tools. He worked for a man who had a blacksmith shop located on the ground where the post office is now. Mm-hmm. And he, a man by the name of Hoover. He worked for Hoover for a number of years, and finally I helped him to purchase an outfit for himself. And he had a contract with with the gas company for sharpening their tools. Which he operated for a number of years. But he finally lost his health. Before that, though, I built a home for him down at West Dunbar.
The house is still there, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right there, just past the Rose Valley Church.
And of course he married, had 4 or 5 children. Let's see what else do I.
He was married to Encore. Encore is still living out in California with Mabel.
Yeah.
Out in Compton or in Arthur's moved to California.
Looked up when he died.
Mm-hmm.
After his death, I turned the house over to his children.
Did any of your brothers ever work with you in business, Dad?
Well, Enos worked with me some, but I learned to cut meat with my brother John. Mm-hmm. He was a butcher, and he had the only meat market in Montgomery, West Virginia at one time. He was a close friend of Squire Montgomery, and he wouldn't let any other butcher come in there while my brother was operating a meat market there.
How did he happen to go to Montgomery?
Who?
Your brother John.
Well, through they wanted a meat market up there, and my brother John, through Squire Montgomery, he got a location for him and had him to come there, and wouldn't let any other butcher come in there. So I had, in the meantime, I had been away. I'd traveled with the show and saved a little money, and come back here, and I decided I wanted to learn. I didn't want to butcher, but I wanted to learn how to cut meat. So I spent one winter up there at Montgomery with my brother John. He taught me how to cut meat. I didn't want to butcher because I kind of chicken-hearted. I couldn't stand to kill, especially little lambs, because they were so. But I did want to learn how to cut meat, which he taught me how. Then I decided to come back here to Charleston and went in business for myself. And I bought a second-hand outfit from some man up there a little town there near Colberg, I think it was. I bought this outfit and shipped it down here. In the meantime, I had rented a room from Fred Gardner. He was a butcher, and he had he was in business himself, but he owned this property on the corner of Capitol and Dryden Street. And he owned Capitol and Dryden and back to Egan Street. And he had a vacant room on the corner of Egan and Dryden Street. I rented that room and put the equipment in there and went in to meet.
Now, the tape ended just as we were telling how Dad rented the room to go into the meat market business for himself. So we'll continue at that point. We were right here where we are now, at the corner on Egan Street, only this time you were at the corner of Egan and Dryden Street.
Mm-hmm.
So you went into business at that point.
Well, I went out of trouble with the show, you know. I thought I saved the money.
Mm-hmm. You traveling with the show?
I don't want to we had a band.
Okay, well, we can get it in there.
Yeah. Then we had a band here. And my brother John, Enos, Charlie, and myself all played in this band. Well, my brother Enos, he was really an expert baritone player. He could really play. He really could play that baritone. He could play with solos, Old Kentucky Home with variations, and Mosses in the Cold, Cold Ground. All that. He was good. Well, he taught me how to play mostly a slide trombone.
Who was that?
My brother Enos.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a drummer. He could beat the drums too. He was just a natural born mechanic. And and when he went with this show, Uncle Tom's Cabin, out of Cincinnati, and I had been taking lessons. He had been teaching me how to play the trombone, and I began to play very well. So he finally got me a job with the show. Al Martin's Uncle Tom's Cabin. And the man liked me so well, a fellow named William Reed. He had the contract for the band. But the second season, the man that owned the show, he decided to put on a number.
Go ahead.
He decided to put on another show. It was owned by Al Martin. He was the owner of the show, so he decided to put on a number 2 show, and had to get a band together for the number 2 show. And the man that had the contract with the band, he put me in charge of the band, paying the boys and handling the band. He was on the number 1 show, and he put me in charge of handling the number 2 show. Well, it didn't pay very much a week, but anyhow, I saved what money I could, and I used to. Most of the boys on the show gambled. They liked to shoot craps, but I didn't go in for that. It was another fellow can't think of his name at present. I will later on, though. But and I saved my money every week. When I got my money, I'd send it, get a money orders and send them here to my mother. See, most of the other boys they gambled. They as soon as they got paid, they'd start a big gambling game back there. And the woman wouldn't get the check. They'd make over $5 or $10 a week in the board, you know, and traveling expenses. Some of them lose their money before they got it good, and they want to borrow. Well, I used to loan them money. If I lend them $5, $4, I make them pay me $5 payday. See, and I stood in with the treasurer, and I see that I got my money before they got theirs.
Business sense coming out even then.
Yeah, so I'd send my money here to my mother. I get money orders, send it here to my mother. I'll never forget when the season closed. I was only out 2 years, but I'd save. I'd send it $200 or $300 home here, and old man Whitehurst, when my mother, she just put them away for me, you know. I'd get the money orders. Postal Express money orders. See, Adams Express money orders. And when I come home, took all these money orders down. Old man Adams didn't have money enough to cash them for me. I only had, I don't know, $200 or $300 worth, but that was a whole lot of money in those days.
A whole lot now.
Oh, I had a wonderful experience.
While you're mentioning some of your financial adventures, I want you to back up a few years and tell about some of the things that you and your friend T.D. Henderson used to do. You mentioned earlier that the two of you were fast friends. Does he have any relatives living in Charleston now?
No, I think all the Hendersons have passed away, I think. Mm-hmm. But T.D. and I were good friends. He and I used to shine shoes together, run down and carry up coal on Capitol Street along there where Frankenberger's is now. Those stores along across from the Kenora Bank and Trust Company, they were office buildings there then, and they didn't have all this electricity and electrical heat and gas like they have now. They used to buy coal, with a ton of coal at a time, and they'd dump coal right on the sidewalk, see? And the tenants would have to have it carried upstairs, put in the coal bins. And T.D. and I used to make a specialty of going down there, watching out for the coal. They'd give us 50 cents or $1 to carry it upstairs and put it in their coal bins. Then we used to do a little financing business for picking up bottles, whiskey bottles, beer bottles, and we used to, our big deals was getting empty oil drums. They used to, in those days, the stores all handled kerosene oil, and they bought this oil in big 50-gallon drums. Well, now, if we could get a hold of some of those oil drums and take them from Capitol Street down across Court Street there on the river bank, this Bluestein's used to have a kind of a junk place there where they bought all kind of animal hides and junk, and especially they'd give us $1 if we get one of those 50-gallon gas oil drums, and we used to get those back then. Slip those drums out of those places on behind the Gates store. Gates had a big store there then. And roll them down that Bluestein, get $1 piece for them. That's big money.
Well, were you supposed to take those drums?
Huh?
Were you supposed to take those drums?
No, it wasn't. We'd steal those drums. We'd slip them out of there. They got wise later on. They finally put up a fence back there, fenced them off, put a lock on the fence so we boys couldn't steal it.
Mm-hmm. Now, they used to keep those drums outside, and then they'd take the oil inside.
Yeah,
and work it with a hand pump.
They take the drum in. Yeah, it empty the oil out of these drums and put it into their hand pumps inside the stores. See, and they took the empty drums out back.
So when did you do all this moving, this transferring at nighttime?
No, in the day. We didn't operate at night. We get them out of the day. They didn't bother us much about it. They knew we boys. We'd take them with Bluestein to buy what we bring down there.
And at that time, they burned coal in those stores along Capitol Street too, didn't they?
Oh yeah.
They used to bring coal there by the wagon load, by the ton.
Yeah.
And I think I heard you say that you used to get 50 cents to $1 for carrying a ton of that coal upstairs in those buildings.
Yeah. They upstairs, and they had a place in the halls where they kept the coal.
Do you remember anything about the first job you ever had, Dad? Job when you made big money, $5 a week.
Yeah, the first job I ever had that paid me as much as $5 a week. I guess I was about 13 or 14, I guess then, was with S.Q. Smith and Cannon. I was helping a tinner there by the name of Moss. He was a tinner, and they used to use lots of stovepipe in those days. They used to make it there, and I helped Mr. Moss. He showed me how to make stovepipe, and I got $5 a week. That was a big job. Then later on, I went to work for Goldbarth and Straws. I think I got it for about, maybe $6 a week for them. We had to working around the department store there, see, you know, where Frankenberger's is now. And when I worked for them, Miss Beatrice Hess was the cashier there. She finally married Kleeman, who was now, I think he's dead now, I believe, but and I got about $6 a week working there for Goldbarth and Straw. White fella used to make carpets there. His name was Harry Knoll. And I helped him to make carpets and lay the carpets after we made it. In those days, people used to use a lot of this straw matting for floors, but they don't use that anymore. I don't know what happened to that, but we used to lay that matting, hang window shades, make window shades. Yeah. Well, that's about all I think I can.
Okay. We're going to resume our taping. Dad's just had dinner. It's December 31st, 1973. Once you mentioned, Dad, that your mother, after you moved down from the hill down on Court Street in what we know now as the Triangle District, that's being so terribly torn up at the moment, and because of the interstate highway construction that's going on out there, there's not very much of the Triangle left. As a matter of fact, now it's just a massive solid stone piers that are going to support the highway and the overpasses over what's left of the Triangle District. But you mentioned that your mother did the laundry for a lot of the sporting women who, for a long time, had made up very much of a part of the history of Charleston. Who were some of them? Can you remember the names of some of those ladies around town? Were they white? Were they black? Or who were they?
No, they were mostly white. And one of the largest sporting houses out in that Court Street and Dryden Street section was a woman with the name of Hattie Behrman. Were you taking that?
Yeah. Where was she located?
She had a large house right on the corner of Court and Dryden Street.
I can remember seeing a lot of white women hanging out of windows down there when I was a little girl, going to take knitting lessons at a settlement house there on Dryden, North Ranch.
She was had the largest house and of any of the sporting women there at that time.
Did they present a problem? Were they bothered much by the police or the local authorities, or?
Oh yeah, they raid them every now and then, but they'd pay their fines and continue to operate.
Did they have any Negro women as a part of their establishment?
No.
But their clientele, who comprised the clientele?
Well, most of the wealthy white men around Charleston.
Your mother's house was pretty close to her place, wasn't it?
Huh?
Your mother's house was located pretty close to Hattie Behrman's place.
Yeah, we were just in a half a block when we lived across the railroad. We was only just a block from her house. And then after we moved over on Dryden Street, we were still just about a half a block away. We were right in the section there.
Well, you mentioned that at about this time you began hustling around. You finally moved from Court Street area over to North Rand Street.
Yeah.
You mentioned Mr. Agan, whose name I guess is the name for which this street that we're living on now.
Yeah, that's right. David Agins he owned the house that we moved in on North Rand Street.
How many of you were at home then?
Well, I was the only boy that stayed home regular, but my brother Enos, he was there some time.
And you mentioned Della, your sister Della, and your niece.
Sister Della and Nina. Mother and myself, we were the regular ones.
Nina was the oldest, was the daughter of your oldest sister, Mary Nichols. Your mother raised Nina.
Yeah.
Nina, I think we mentioned earlier, died in Detroit. And they notified you of her death. And you informed the undertaker to give her a decent burial, which at that time was something like $150 to $200. And you buried her. You said that she didn't have much insurance.
Now there's one of my sister Mary's son that I forgot to mention. That was James. James Brown. He was the father of Agnes and
Annie and all of them.
Married them.
You mentioned also that you went to Detroit and met the man who buried her, and that later the same undertaker moved to Logan County. That was interesting that he go from West Virginia to Logan County. All right. Now, let me see. Oh, you mentioned the schoolhouses that were available to the little Negro children at that time. You mentioned that there was one on the west side. It seems the authorities rented houses which were used as schools for the...
Yeah, there weren't any regular school buildings. The school board would find a 3 or 4 room, preferably 4-room house, and they used one of the rooms for classrooms, see, and the rest of it just for recreation and so forth.
Who were some of your teachers, Dad? Where did you go to school? I know you mentioned that you didn't get to school very much.
No, well, I first went to school to a man named Otha Wells. And later, Isom Cabell. All that's while we lived on the west side, see. Isom Cabell. Then at a later date, we went to Lottie Friend. She was a young girl. She lived down at what is now Institute.
You knew her son quite well. One of her sons. She had a lot of sons.
Oh yeah, yes, I knew.
Scotty.
Scotty and Dallas and that other boy's name was him.
What about Miss Lizzie Porterfield? Who was she?
Well, she lived here in Charleston, and she had her brothers one of them lived on what is now Washington Street, just below Court Street. She lived there with her brother, Fleet Porterfield.
She was also a sister of Naomi Farrell's mother, I think you said.
Yes.
Who's Naomi Farrell?
Norma Farrell. She was a school teacher. She now lives in Portland, Oregon.
Oh, I met her.
Yeah, she married
Naola
Smith.
Naola Smith. Yes, when I went to Chicago a few years ago before she moved, she entertained me quite graciously. I met her daughter and her granddaughter.
And she was a classmate now of Captain Ferguson.
Is that so?
Granny, her mother was very peculiar. Granny they were kind of courting when they were in school. And so Granny says he used to walk, they lived up there on Brook Street, their old home places there on Brook Street. And said he was walking home from school with Naomi was carrying her books, and her mother, name was Helen Farrell. And so she said, "Now, Mr. Ferguson, you don't need to be carrying Naomi's books for her. She's perfectly able to carry them home." Granny told me that. Perfectly able to carry her own books.
Now, how were those schools organized, Dad? Who hired the teachers and who sort of managed them? Did they have a board of education for the Negroes then, or how was it organized?
No, well, they had a white board, but they'd always appoint someone Negro that's kind of you might say, to represent the Negroes.
Do you remember any of the persons who...
Yeah, one of one I remember mostly was Mr. James, C.H. James.
Mm-hmm.
He was, remember, he lived on the west side and had a produce place down on Charleston Street where they used to go out the country and bring in chickens and eggs and so forth.
Where was Charleston Street? I'd never heard of that one before.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have a
Charleston
street called Charleston Street now that I know of.
Yeah, that was now. It was at a time called Cinder Road.
Mm-hmm.
Because they used to, in the summer, they would haul cinders and put cinders along on the road, so when bad weather set in, it wouldn't be so hard for the trucks to travel.
Mm-hmm.
So at that time they called it, which is now Washington Street. It was called Cinder Road.
I see. Tell me about Mr. James. You mentioned that he lived on Charleston Street, and I remember once before you mentioned how they had a wagon that was in 2 layers. Tell us about that.
Kind of see, in those days I used to go all out through around out in Sissonsville and out in the country, see, and they would go to the dry goods stores here and pick up what they thought the country people needed of the country, and they'd take such as maybe linens, clothing, shoes, not so much any shoes, but other items that people used to make a lot of their clothes those days, bolts of cotton, so forth, and they'd trade that for chickens and eggs.
I see. Now you mentioned they. Who was with Mr. James then? Who was working with him?
His brother.
What was his brother's name?
Well, let's see now. I can't think of his name right at present, but it will come to me, because one of his brothers was really, they were partners.
Was it Charles?
Two of those
Let's
brothers.
see, Charles and Edward. I wonder if any of the sons, Daniel, had the name for the brothers. There's Charles. Edward died last year.
Let's see.
And Daniel. Well, we'll get to that.
One of them left here and went out to New Zealand, Auckland, New Zealand, I remember.
Oh, really?
He had a business out there. I think he died. He's not taking it away. He died several years ago, but I'll think of his name after a while.
Now, while we're talking about what used to be Cinder Road, when was it that the bridge fell?
Bridge fell?
On
Well,
Washington Street over Elk River.
Well, I see the exact year. When that bridge fell, it must have been about 19, let's see.
Well, you told me about it. We can get the date on it. That's not important. There was an article in the paper about it some time ago. Someone who remembered it, but I heard you mention it too.
No, when